employment and livelihood strategies. And this is about addressing the barriers underneath. So the basic package of support is a multi-component homegrown response to youth exclusion. And we see that many of the programs are really, really important in our labour market situation. Some of them are skills training, and we've heard that maybe that's not the right emphasis. Supply side is not our problem. Some of them are job placement and creating job opportunities, such as public employment programs, and we've heard that those are really important. They're addressing the right problem. And they are critical interventions in the suite of policy tools. But the BPS was designed to help with the stickiness of those programs. So young people face these multiple compounding barriers, but little support to navigate the services and opportunities available to them. And the services they need to access to overcome the barriers are themselves often hard to access, poorly coordinated, and create cycles of exclusion. So if we imagine being a young person, and there's all of these opportunities out there, how do I know what is the best opportunity for me, and how do I get there? We might have the education assistance program, and we know for a number of young people, thousands of young people, this has been their first work opportunity, and it's a really important program. So maybe I can go to that. But there's also this welding learnership and a plumbing learnership and an NYDA entrepreneurship program and many NGOs offering programs in my local community, but I really don't know what is the best step for me. And if I do know what the best step for me is, there's a whole lot of barriers. What about the costs of getting there? What about needing childcare for my brother who I've got to leave at home? What about data costs? What about I'm going to fail because I failed so many times before when I've applied for things and people haven't got back to me and I'm discouraged about that. So there's all of these barriers that are in place for a young person. So the principles of an integrated approach are to ensure that young people have access to the services they need to comprehensively address multidimensional barriers. You're at a public economics conference. The focus is on labour market policy and it's on tax policy, but I've heard very little about social policy. And social policy is critical besides social assistance. We have heard some talk about the grants, right? But social policy is critical, and because we're whole people, we're not just work seekers, and we have a range of other barriers, particularly if we're living in contexts of chronic underservice and poverty. So we need to be able to profile a young person and tailor services and opportunities to their needs. So referring them to the right service or right opportunity at the right time. Providing follow-up support to reduce dropout and churn. We know that a number of young people take up opportunities and drop out 2 months later, often for very rational reasons. Can we scaffold support underneath them to make sure they don't drop out? And can we scaffold support so that they're thinking about what is the next step? The principles of an integrated approach, we expect larger effects in the longer term, and it's context specific. So the basic package of support has 2 components. You've heard Ariane talk mainly about the red one, but we've also got the community of practice service strengthening track, which is about engaging providers. Those are service providers in a range of life areas, strengthening coordination, improving service delivery to youth, and ensuring no young person falls through the cracks. A little bit about the pilot results which were published in 2024. We see again that vulnerability profile. I'll skip over that. But what we see is that after 3 coaching sessions, we have a significant reduction in the young people reporting low life satisfaction, a significant reduction in young people reporting possible generalized anxiety disorder, as well as a reduction in the number of young people recording high psychological distress. We also see a significant improvement in young people accessing services. So at baseline, 26% of young people said there are no services in their community that will help them. And after 3 coaching sessions, that reduced to only 8%. That's because we're helping young people to identify the right services and also working with those services to serve young people better. After 4 sessions, we see, so the first block is 88%. After 1 session, all of them that come in are screened for being NEET. After 1 session, 88% of them remain NEET, and after 4 sessions, 64% remain NEET. We do know that some of these young people in the short term cycle back into being NEET after taking short-term opportunities, which is exactly why that longer-term support is necessary, so that when you end an opportunity, somebody's taking you by the hand and saying, okay, what's your next step? Let's think about it. And so that ongoing support is not nice to have add-on. It's absolutely critical if we want to reduce churn in the labour market. So if we imagine that maze of opportunities ahead of a young person, this is what it might look like for a young person with that scaffolding underneath them. They might enter the education assistance program, really enjoy it, then be able to access a TVET certificate program if they've been able to reduce the barriers to accessing that program by accessing services that will help them to do that, and so on. I think I'll skip over this. It's really just to make the point that if we are going to be asking different questions, it requires us to really understand who we're serving, and it requires us to accept that the solutions are hard and they require long-term, deep commitment if we want to make our investments stick. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Oh, we can become much more enthusiastic. I know that was a lot. Come on, come on. So this morning we heard about the unprecedented scale of the problem that we have in our country. And so a program like yours, Lauren, is a tough one in this particular context. BPS was piloted in 3 sites with intensive individualized coaching. You've shared with us the importance of that and the results that has been achieved. To you, what is the biggest tension you see between keeping that individualized, trust-based model and scaling it to provincial or national level?
Thanks, Najwa. I think when we're facing the kind of problem we are in South Africa, it is we want to go for solutions where we've got high numbers, and that is a reality. We've got to reach high numbers of young people. But I think we, at the same time, need to be thinking, what does scale mean? Does scale mean a once-off skills training opportunity for millions of young people? Does it mean a once-off job placement opportunity for young people? I think that's part of the solution for sure. But we've also got to be thinking about impact alongside scale. And what are we trying to scale? Are we trying to what we talk about is scaling wide, which is increasing the numbers, and that's really important, but also scaling deep. Are we trying to change the fundamental barriers underneath which these young people are struggling? And that requires deep work in communities, and it's long-term work. And that can be, in part, it's about that individualized coaching, and I think part of what we're playing with is how do we increase the numbers of young people that have the coaching without losing too much of the personal touch. And I think there are ways to do that. But also, are we working in communities deeply to overcome the siloed approach in which local services are being delivered, in which young people are being turned away left, right, and center? How do we ensure that at the local level, we're enabling people to not close the door on young people, but facilitate these pathways for young people? So it's a different approach to scaling. It's about scaling deep and looking for impact. And I think these things have to go hand in hand with the programs that are scaling wide as well.
Thank you, Lauren. Tell us a little bit about when you did the first pilot in Atlantis, right? And talking to this issue of scaling deep, right? What did you do? How did you approach that community? What were some of the pain points as you were trying to mobilize the community? Because we know that when we are referring young people, if the phone isn't answered or the place that you have referred them to does not respond, you know, it is just a setback in that young person's life. So just share a little bit of that.
Yeah, so the community of practice approach in the communities is one where we really work hand in hand with a range of service providers. Those are service providers offering support to young people, but also service providers offering opportunities to young people. And we've had experiences, of service providers going, what do we have to do with young people in this community? With youth unemployment. We're an ECD provider. We work with young children. We don't work with youth. What do we have to do with it? And they refuse to come to our community of practice, for instance. We've had the police refuse to come to our community of practice. And eventually, we managed to get them on board. And we've had things like the ECD forum in the community saying, oh, we get it now. We do play a role in youth employment because so many young women are stuck with being able to go and look for work and go for interviews because they have nowhere to leave their children. And so the ECD have a rotating system now between the ECDs in the community that have slots available for young women to leave their children so they can go and look for work or go to an interview. We've had the police come on board now where they realize that when a young person is faced with violence in the community, and it's a high violence community, there's high levels of trauma, and where victim empowerment programs are now a lot more accessible to young people. So we're helping young people to overcome the traumas that they're facing so that they're better placed then to step into opportunity when it is available. But it's hard work to convince service providers of their role, convince service providers that not to give up on young people, that young people are not lazy and sitting on the side of the road, and that they have a role to play in supporting young people through these different pathways.
Thank you. So really emphasizing the importance of place-based responses and when we are working with young people. I want to ask you, what would you say to a Treasury official who points out that the fiscal year budget cycle makes it really hard to find anything whose payoff is sustained rather than immediate?
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's a tough one. And I think it applies to so many programs out there. So many of our programs are funded on a short-term cycle, whereas actually the longer-term investment is crucial. We see it in the SRD, for instance, when it's cut off, it's disruptive. We see it in the education assistance program when it's cut off, it's disrupted. So longer-term investments, we see these longer-term outcomes by sustaining something. And that we've got to have a longer-term vision if we want to be reducing churn in the labour market, that we have to invest in the long term. Because this is a problem that has been 30, 40, 50 years in the making. We're not going to solve it in a budget cycle of 1 year. We have to, and I think the conversation earlier about which active labour market programs work, which ones do we need to phase out, is an important one. And the ones that work, we really have to invest in the long term.
Thank you, Lauren. So BPS is really the glue in the system. It's the connective tissue in the system. Before I open it up to our participants here, and conclude our discussion on the basic package of support, I would like to leave you with one important reflection. Behind every data set, behind every policy recommendation, and behind every intervention we have discussed today is a young person with aspirations, potential, and a unique journey. I want to share with you a video. And the video that you're about to watch tells us the story of one young participant whose journey demonstrates the impact of a more integrated approach. It reminds us that effective public policy is measured not only by the evidence it generates, but by the lives it changes. And as you watch, I invite you to reflect on one question. If we know what works, how do we ensure that more young people can benefit from interventions like these. Team?
From a young age, I was living by my grandma. As a kid, I was always in trouble. I was violent, I was rude towards my teachers, I never had respect because I never had support in my life. On school, I was always called names, I was always bullied, My teachers would also break me down, calling me a disgrace, calling me whatever they feel like fits me. They didn't have the patience to understand me, to see what I am actually going through. Here at PPS, they believe in me, they see my potential, they want us to win, they help us with our CVs. We are open to them, and how nice it feels to just open to someone about something small or whatever the case may be. It's nice. When I opened up, I felt like it's the best thing I ever done. They helped me reach and tap into the thing I love most. So at the moment, I'm training models, kids at the grooming school. Training others is my passion. Because it will be selfish of me to keep all the things that I know to myself. If you see a kid with potential, show him the proper way. So when I'm training others, I feel amazing. I feel inspired by them. 1, 2, 3, let's go. I want to have my own studio one day. I want to fly to Milan. I want to model in Milan Fashion Week. I want to have my own fashion school. Honestly, I just want to make the most out of Atlantis, Coming from nothing motivates me. As soon as you see the people that is rooting for you, the people that's actually trying to give a hand out to lift you up. Well done. Because as soon as you see that, you see life.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's why we get up in the morning. That's why we do what we do. That was a new pathway. It's not the traditional one, is it? But there are so many possibilities if we just listen and we provide the kind of support that is needed when it's needed. So now over to you. We've got 4 minutes for questions. Oh, okay. Over here. And this gentleman over here. And there's a gentleman right at the back as well.
Thank you so much.
Be brief, be bright, and let's go, right?
Okay, thank you. I think from the morning until now, the evidence has been that many young people cycle back into the NEET status after short-term employment, and as much as we do have the programs, I do believe that they provide short-term income while maintaining labor market attachment. So my question is, should South Africa maybe redefine the success of youth employment interventions to prioritize sustained labor market attachment, earnings mobility, career progressions, rather than just initial placement alone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the insightful presentation. My question is, what informed BPS decision to scale inwards as opposed to horizontally? Thank you.
Thank you, good one. Gentleman at the back, and then Vusi, I'm going to go over to you and see if there's anything from our online audience. Yes, sir.
Right, thank you very much. I just have a question with regards to your service providers, as you were saying that you didn't get much support. Is it possible maybe if probably in the future you would partner up with organizations like the NYDA, as they've got higher reach, more reach, especially in more disadvantaged provinces with high employment rates like your Limpopo, your Eastern Cape and the likes, also to reduce some cost limitations probably that you have on certain projects that you want to initiate in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Vusi?
No questions at the moment.
No questions. Okay, Lauren, over to you.
So I really like the idea of when we're thinking about outcomes is to think about sustained labour market outcomes. And maybe it's not just sustained labour market outcomes, but sustained pathways, because it's a mix of formal and job opportunity and self-employment and training. So are we seeing stickiness to opportunity in the labour market, and skills training environment and progression, I think, is important. How we measure that is a little bit more tricky, but I do think we need to be thinking about that for sure. What informed scaling deep as opposed to wide? So I don't see these as either or questions. It's not about trading off scaling deep with scaling wide. Ultimately, we do want to be able to reach more young people, but not at the cost of losing the impact, right? So and for us, the impact is that longer term stickiness and that trust building, which does take time. So we would see BPS as something that is a useful add-on to any program that is scaling wide. If you're looking at a public employment program or an NYDA program, can you build in the BPS approach so that that program has that stickiness built into it? And that's certainly what we've been looking at, which brings me to the third question, which is around, would we be working with NYDA? So NYDA does tend to be part of our communities of practice in the sites that we've been working in, which are now no longer pilot sites. They're flagship sites, and they're going to be supporting other sites. NYDA is absolutely a crucial partner, and we are also in conversation with NYDA about building BPS into the NYDA programs.
Thank you, Lauren. And just to say, you know, this is just not about government departments partnering with BPS. Here's an opportunity for the private sector, okay? Adopt a center. Go out there, make your money work, take a long-term approach to development in our country and to investing in the youth in our country. And if you want to brand it as the MTN Center or the Vodacom Center or the whatever center, come and do it. But there is a way in which we engage young people. There's a way in which we support it. So be a part of the solution. And on that note, I'm going to say thank you so much to Lauren. And when you get into a funk, take a break, my sweet. Take a break.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Najwa.
Thank you so much, Najwa, Ariane, as well as Lauren, for such insightful, and should I add, practical and evidential, if there's such a term, of the work that you do. You need help? Oh, goodness. Let me do this. Is this you?
Yeah, it's fine. You can
all right.
I'm not leaving you, Vusi. I'm still staying here. You're stuck with me. Sorry.
All right. And these chocolates, are they yours?
You want some?
All right. It's like there are goodies here. Okay.
So, I'm still on, my seat. I'm still on. Okay.
All right. Go ahead.
So, earlier on, when I introduced this segment on the agenda, I promised that we were going to get practical about what works and the challenges that continue to bedevil our implementation of our youth employment strategies. So by way of introduction, let me say that we are extremely fortunate to be joined by our next panelists. They have all made their mark and have worked tirelessly to remove the barriers to youth unemployment, to give our youth a leg up and a fighting chance. So, Mapaseka, Jackie, Kate, and Alex, please join me. Woohoo! And as they are joining us, as they are joining me up here, just a little bit about Mapaseka. Mapaseka says she's from a village in the northwest called Taung. And while she's a big tennis fan, must have been impressed with Djokovic last night, she spent all her childhood playing netball. She also says that you might be surprised to know that she's never drunk coffee in her life. She just grew up believing that it was not good for her. Take that.
My mother.
Okay. And then we have Jackie. Jackie here is a closet builder. Her favorite shop is a hardware store where she moons, and this is my little add-on, over power tools. Okay? It's like moons over those things there. She is project managing the building of her home and has done all the woodwork herself. Wow, Jackie. Take that. And we have Kate here. Her real passion is photography, particularly of water, which she says is so impossible to capture with its light, movement, and reflection. And more recently, she's enjoying silk screening prints of her water photography. She goes on to say her day job is her backup career until she makes it as a photographer. I'm torn. You do such good work now, and I don't know that I can afford to lose you. Okay? And then we have Alex. He loves getting his hands dirty, and the kind of work that we do with youth and young people and the messiness of what we deal with in creating jobs. He says he loves getting his hands dirty, particularly in the garden. He loves watching things grow, particularly in pots, parsley, petunias, clivias, and his personal favorite, miniature bushveld fig trees. And on weekends, you will find him tinkering with power tools while listening to jazz. So welcome to this amazing panel.
Wow.
Ag nee man, klop harder. Daar's hy. Okay. So this morning, discussions were quite riveting, right? Riveting, amazing, scary. We heard, if I have to distill some of the core challenges, they said our economy is not creating enough jobs, young people struggle to transition into work, skills and employer demand are often disconnected, support programs operate in silos, and we have not yet built pathways that connect social protection, skills, entrepreneurship, and employment into a coherent system. Now, my panel are not going to do presentations, right? Because they really want to get your voice into the room as well. But having said that, let me at the outset acknowledge the work that each and every one of you do and the results that you have achieved, providing important anchors to South Africa's response to unprecedented levels of unemployment. I know that I've only given you a short time to talk about some of the things that we do, but we're going to get into discussion. But I really just think it is important that you know that the results that you have achieved, the work that you have done, the way in which that work anchors our response to unemployment in the country is seen. I want you to know that you are seen. Thank you. So, Mapasek, I'm going to start with you, and each of you are going to have like about 8 minutes, right? And I want you just to provide a brief overview of Vision 2030 Work SA Youth Employment Strategy. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Najwa. Good afternoon, everyone. It's so nice to be amongst friends, really. So lovely to be on this panel today. So I'll give you an overview of what Vision 2030 is, or what we're calling Work SA, particularly the Youth Employment Strategy. So I work for the Presidential Youth Employment Intervention, PYEI for short, and the PYEI was launched in 2020 by the President as a response to this critical unemployment crisis that we are also familiar with, and we've heard all the numerous challenges that face young people from numerous panelists this morning. So it is a country's most comprehensive response to the crisis that we're facing. Comprehensive because of the way we are aligning ourselves, the way we've organized ourselves as government. We are working towards strategically aligning the various active labor market programs, responses that exist within numerous government portfolios. We are also working to design more effective and efficient systems that can solve this problem of youth unemployment. And we know that youth unemployment is an immediate crisis, one that needs deliberate intervention, because it is not sufficient. I mean, growth, we heard that economic growth, we need growth for jobs, but we have learned that economic growth, while it is a necessary condition, it is not a sufficient condition to ensure that young people are gainfully employed. The data shows that GDP growth, actually youth employment, is decoupled from GDP growth. So even when the economy is growing, young people are not getting absorbed into the labor market. So the Vision 2030, the Work SA agenda for youth employment, is to reduce youth unemployment by 20% by 2030, or alternatively create 1.8 million new earning opportunities for young people by 2030. Now, whenever we present that number to government departments, they say it's so modest, it's so little. 1.8 million opportunities between now and 2030 is not a lot. But this was modeled, this target was modeled against SARB forecasts, the South African Reserve Bank forecasts, as well as IMF growth rate forecasts. And so that's how we came to that 20%. Now, the way that we plan on achieving this target is, firstly, we acknowledge that youth are not a homogeneous group. So they need different types of interventions depending on their distance to the labor market. And our response to this is to we have 5 strategic levers that are going to drive this strategy. The first one is called inclusive hiring. And this is literally making sure that all new entry-level jobs that are added to the economy actually go to young people, that an entry-level job is actually an entry-level job, and a young person can actually access it, not requiring 10 years of experience for an entry-level job, both in the public and the private sector. The second lever is priority growth sectors. So there are a number of, there's 5 sectors that we have identified with huge potential to create entry-level jobs for young people, sectors that have low barriers to entry and that just need a small unlock for those jobs to be created. The sectors are tourism, global business services, the digital economy, the green economy, agriculture, but particularly the fruits and nuts value chain. That is 5 sectors, yes. Okay, so that's lever 2. And then the third lever is demand-led skilling. We heard, I think there was also a question in the morning about how there's a need to change the skilling sector so that it is more responsive to the labor market demand. So part of our intervention is to revolutionize the skilling sector, and that is work that we're doing with the Department of Higher Education. The fourth lever, also a topic that was talked about this morning, is sustainable self-employment, so equipping young people with the support that they need to start something for themselves and to make sure that those businesses are sustainable, particularly in the informal economy, because we know that South Africa's informal economy, we don't have a lot of counted activity in the informal economy. Although we know it's thriving, it's bustling, young people do need quite significant support to make sure that they don't end up in precarious earning conditions in that informal economy. And then the fifth lever is public employment programs. And of course, my colleague, Dr. Kate Phillip, leads the broader work of public employment programs. In the PYEI, we have a youth-specific public employment program called the National Youth Service. So those are the 5 levers of the Presidential Youth Employment Intervention that are working towards this Vision 2030, 20% reduction in youth unemployment. We have a number of flagship interventions that are practical ways in which we are working within the labor market to reach young people. The first one is Jobs Boost, which was an outcomes-based pilot, one that took significant learnings from the Bonds for Jobs pilot that Jobs Fund did a few years ago. So we built on that, and we created 4,500 verified jobs in this first pilot, and we're planning to scale it. So the National Skills Fund will be transformed into a outcomes-based fund. The second intervention is the National Pathway Management Network, but my colleague from Harambee will speak more about that. To explain what that is, it is a network of networks where we realize that there are so many players in the ecosystem that are working towards solving youth unemployment, and how do we bring them together so that we can work together and that our programs complement one another as we try and solve this youth unemployment crisis. The third intervention is the Innovation Fund. The Innovation Fund forms part of the NPMN, and this fund is really meant to support pilots, those innovative ideas that are addressing barriers that young people are facing, with the vision of scaling that pilot. So when we see that something works and it is addressing an issue like BPS, we want to scale it, we want to integrate it into government. And then our fourth and final intervention, and I'll stop after this one, is the National Youth Service. So this is the PYEI's public employment program. The National Youth Service, like a public employment program, is one that reaches young people wherever they are across the country. It is 16 hours per week of community service, and the young person is stipended for that time while gaining experience and also servicing their community. So,
Thank you, Mafaseka. Over to you, Alex. So you're a long-standing partner of the Jobs Fund. Can you just provide us with a brief overview of the barriers that Harambee initially sought to address, right? And now, in the more recent years, you've also been appointed as the National Pathway Manager, as Mapaseka has said. It's a component of the Presidential Youth Employment Intervention. Just the high level, kind of, what are those barriers that you're seeking to address?
Thank you, Najwa, and thank you, everybody, for being here. And I feel very privileged to be sitting here with people of this caliber on this stage, including you, Najwa. Thank you for your kind words too. So Harambee is a social enterprise, meaning it's not a private entity, it's a socially funded organization that aims to solve youth employment issues through partnerships. And on a high level, we sort of try to address what we see as 3 almost issues or barriers or frictions in the labor market. One, which is the one that we've been working on longest, and with the Jobs Fund for, is it now 14, 15 years, is a supply-demand mismatch friction. We also phrase that as barriers to entry, particularly for young people getting into the labor market. What do we do in that respect? The biggest thing we do in practice is we run a application called the sayouth.mobi site. That is the young person facing site. We've got almost 5 million young people that are registered and that have received some form of work-seeking support on that site. The employer-facing site is sayouth.co.za. Anybody interested can go and look up those sites and participate. And that engine is an inclusive matching engine where we use some inclusive proxies and screeners and alternative ways to to match young people to jobs. We can get into that a little bit later. Another big issue that we see in the labor market and that we've been addressing for a long time is just that there's simply not enough jobs. That issue has come up multiple times. We currently address that in a few different ways. One is to help with labor market intelligence to identify the type of sectors that Mapaseka has talked about. A second is to, where necessary, intervene and try to unlock some of that sectors. Harambee has been instrumental in unlocking some of the jobs in the global business services sector. We've also been currently funding and supporting the Collective X to do something similar in the digital sector, and are also active in both the tourism, IRM, and agricultural sectors at the moment. We are also currently spending a lot of energy trying to figure out how to unlock more jobs in the informal sector. So I actually just want to say we are so supporting everything that's been said about the informal sector over this last day and a half. We have pulled Prof. Borat very close to us and trying to help us figure that out. And the last, maybe the most recent friction or issue that we've addressed or have we seen in the labour market is that we are a relatively young and a bit up to now uncoordinated ecosystem. The coalition of the willing, as we sometimes call it, which I think everybody in this room is, needs some coordination, some tracking, some gathering of the troops, and it's a job that I will admittedly say I don't think we've completely figured out yet. But in that bucket of issues, we do things like run the National Pathway Manager Network, which is the coordinating infrastructure for government, business, and the social sector to come together with solutions and ideas to solve this big issue. We also do some tracking of the various activities in that forum. We actively participate in other people's initiatives, for example, Community of Practice for the PEPs. We generate insights from our data. We do some modeling to support other partners like the PYEI to figure out how much we can get in these various initiatives. And importantly, particularly over the last year or so, we do a lot of convening of government, business, and social sector partners. Over the last year alone, I've been involved in this particular sector now for over 10 years, and I've never seen as much interest from the private sector in this topic as we've seen over the last year. That doesn't mean that it's all led to action yet, but if there's a leading indicator of engagement, then the private sector interest is certainly growing. Just quickly for a little bit of background for Harambee, we are very much funded partially by government and partially by donor money. Those donors are very much aligned with our systems change agenda. We believe that in the longer term, the bigger change we need here is systems, not individual interventions. We believe that linking interventions and programs, we quite often talk about pathway management is the way to go. So we see our funders, there's a monetary effect, people give us money, but there's also partnerships, which actually forms part of our funding. We fund others through partnerships and other funds us through partnerships. Maybe just quickly a few numbers of our, where do we think our impact in the labour market has been. One is just through our ability to use technology to scale. So I've mentioned that we've got almost 5 million people registered. Not every one of them are on the site every day. We've sort of witnessed or been part of linking over 2 million job opportunities. So I've got a rich data set to learn from. We are talking about youth that in our definition is 18 to 34-year-olds, or under 35-year-olds. It's aligned with the stats, sorry, frog in the throat, Stats SA definition. And we sort of focus on, and all our impact data supports that we've been able to help women disproportionately. We've been able to help young people disproportionately, even within that youth band. So the people under 25. And our programs have also been able to reduce the cost of work seeking using the technology, and just helping more people get that first job. I'm going to pause there and get back to questions. We are still on time, right?
Yeah. No, that's great. And, you know, to the audience, I think that something that you might not appreciate in some of the things that Alex has said is that, you know, institutional capacity is a very, very important thing that we need to build in our country. And it doesn't happen, you know, within a single budget cycle. And the point that Alex had made that, you know, we've had a long-standing relationship with Harambee, you know, supporting the organization in building their capacity. And that investment paid off when we were hit with COVID, right? We used that platform to be able to reach the people who needed to be reached, right? And get the payments out. But if we did not have the vision to invest early on and to walk the path, we would not have been able to respond in the manner in which we've had if we hadn't done that, right? And then again, when we said, right now there's the Presidential Youth Employment Intervention, okay? And we went back, and so we continue to leverage institutional capability that was built up over the years through a partnership between government, private sector, philanthropic organizations, and others. And by government showing up in that way, organizations like Harambee has been able to signal to the international market that South Africa is invested, and the back of that be able to raise additional funds for the work that they do with young people. I just thought it's important for us all to understand that, you know, you can have the greatest of programs if you do not have the institutional capability to implement, you're not going to go anywhere, and that's what it takes. It takes stamina, it takes time, it takes commitment. Kate, oh my goodness, I don't know what I'm going to ask you, okay, because like, you've just been central to a very important program that we have. The research this morning spoke to us about, this important anchor that public employment programs play, and you've been at the forefront of design, but perhaps everybody in the room is not quite familiar, so perhaps if you could share a little bit, the work that you've done with the public employment stimulus and the social employment fund.
Sure. Thank you, and thank you again for the introduction, and to reiterate what Alex said, which is that you have contributed in your own amazing and powerful way. I think that what I'm enjoying about the way the day has gone is that I think we're getting a real sense that there are no silver bullets, that all these different interventions need to be mutually supportive, that no single intervention can carry the weight of this crisis alone, and no single intervention has the solution alone. And we're starting to frame this as something called Work SA, which Mapaseka referred to the Vision 2030 as part of Work SA, where what we're saying is we need a Work SA agenda that brings together all these different components and looks at how they align better. And that's very much where the ALMP report that we heard earlier is speaking to that same need. So in what I'm going to be saying now about the public employment programs, just hold in your mind, this is one part of the picture. The presidential employment stimulus started in the context of COVID. We already had an unemployment crisis, and we had a long track record of public employment programs. But in the context of the pandemic, there was a level of what I will call policy panic, because we were losing jobs. We lost 2 million jobs during the pandemic. And that policy panic created an opportunity to do things differently and to do things at scale. And I fully hear what Lauren is saying about the real potential trade-off between scale and quality. At the same time, we need to reach scale because we have a crisis at scale. What the pandemic did was create a unique policy commitment to scale for public employment. And we were able to expand public employment at a scale that has not been done in the country before through the presidential employment stimulus. It was a whole suite of programs. It was a case of saying, anyone with a good idea, come forward, we need to roll out. We had 15 departments participating at the height of the program. At the height of the program, we had, 15 departments participating, but that has been whittled down to a much smaller number of core programs that I think offer particular value in their own way. And I'm going to briefly describe 3 of those, because National Youth Service also kind of overlaps with the employment stimulus, but it will be spoken about, has been spoken about and will be spoken about. So our largest program is the Basic Education Employment Initiatives, earlier was called PYI, that places about 200,000 young people in schools in every cycle. Just out of interest, anyone in the room was a participant? Anyone in the room participated in that program? Not. Okay. Oh, yes, we do have one. Good. I can usually find at least one person in a room of young people who has participated in the program. So that program, as I said, places about 200,000 young people in 23,000 schools across the country. What is unique about it is that every community in the country has a school. And schools have institutional infrastructure. They have a management system. They have payment systems. Schools were able to put up their hands, and it was voluntary. Schools could opt in to say yes, and they all did. We want to be part of this program. And for a school to take 10 to 15 young people into the school didn't break anybody's back, didn't break any systems, was not disruptive, in fact was hugely supportive, not only during the pandemic, but after as well. A key thing about that program is there's almost a one-to-one mentorship relationship often between an education assistant and a teacher. People are getting a very high-quality learning experience. And that really matters because we need the work experience to deliver capabilities and capacities. I think part of the challenge when the stimulus began was actually to say, how do we do public employment a little bit differently? Public employment programs have a long track record all over the world. They can work very well. They can also be awful. There are many public employment programs around the world that are awful. They offer very short-term work experience, 2 to 3 months at very low wages, called stipends because they aren't wages, with poor working conditions that send a message to participants that this is not real work. And when the work sends a message that this is not real work, it undermines the whole purpose of participation in work. It undermines the added value of enabling people to participate in work. But those are design choices. Public employment programs can offer meaningful work that gives people a sense of dignity and purpose and can build capabilities and provide them with steps towards pathways. Again, no silver bullet. And so we saw the key challenge in the context of the employment stimulus is to say, we have this unusual problem in South Africa. We're not the same as the developed world. Usual active labor market policies are not what is going to work. How do we reimagine public employment for our particular context to deal with our particular problems, to deliver a quality work experience? And the importance of work experience, even though it's a time-defined placement, it varies per program. But even though it's a time-defined placement, work experience matters. Why does work experience matter? The data shows us that people with work experience are 3 times more likely to get employment, but also people who whose long-term unemployment has been broken by a short-term opportunity, work opportunity, are double as likely to get employed as people in long-term unemployment. But the work experience also matters because of the capabilities it builds. And employers say that, and that is important. Time management, task management, accountability, responsibility, communication skills, all of these things are vital capabilities for the workplace, but not only the workplace. What we've also learned is that these skills are just as important for going into self-employment, for going into livelihood activity. And in a context where the jobs don't exist, our focus has pivoted a little to how do we better use public employment to support that. So now I'll talk briefly about the Social Employment Fund, which is a different model. So the schools program is targeted at youth. Social employment is also majority youth, but it's a mix of ages. And the Social Employment Fund is a particular model that partners with non-state actors in civil society in recognition that in most communities in the country, there are organizations trying to make a difference in different ways in relation to all kinds of social challenges that are faced. And so the purpose of the Social Employment Fund is to give support to work that is already being done, to amplify it, to scale it, to deepen it, to address a range of social problems. One of the quotes from the president that we often use is, "There's no shortage of work to be done to make South Africa a better place." And we need to use public employment to create social value, to really add value to make South Africa a better place. So the Social Employment Fund is doing things like food security, supporting paralegals to provide support to survivors of gender-based violence, catchment management and a range of environmental programs, early childhood development, public art, therapy for kids through art, anything that fits the category of what we call work for the common good. If it's work for the common good and communities want that work to be done, and there's agency and energy behind that, it can be supported through the Social Employment Fund. That program is a part-time program, and one of the theories of change around the program is that with 2 days of work a week, over a longer duration of time, so people stay in the program for longer, participants can be supported to engage in complementary livelihood activities. That might be further education, or it might be a hustle. It might be starting a micro-enterprise. What we are seeing is that layered support where there's regular and predictable participation in a public employment program, coupled with support to complementary activities, actually helps people onto that post-program pathway more effectively. I'm going to stop there. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kate. Jackie, over to you. You just want to share a little bit about Year Beyond and what are the key barriers that your program is designed to address?
Thanks, Najra, and thanks to everyone. It's lovely to be here. So we are part of the National Youth Service and our youth service program. We've been around for quite a long time, so we're in our 11th year. And I guess we aim to do 3 things. So we focus specifically, we're slightly different to some of the other NYS partners, we focus on under 25-year-olds. And the reason we do that is because we recognize that long-term unemployment destroys confidence and a sense of being. And that is one of the things you need in order to be active in the economy. And so we want to catch young people before that huge barrier becomes really difficult to turn around. And so we focus on 18 to 25-year-olds. And we put a lot of emphasis on rebuilding their confidence and their sense of well-being and creating opportunities for them to engage and understand their role and value in society. And I think that that's really important. We can't solve all the structural employment challenges that we've spoken about. But what we can do is we can create stepping stones that help people navigate this very complex and very often barrier-filled environment in which they find themselves. And that requires real resilience and grit. And so that's one of the things we do. We're a social franchise network, so we have 64 partners who implement. And building on what Kate said, it's really about saying in every community there is work for the public good that needs to be done. There are public spaces that need the capacity of young people to make them better spaces. And they're very often local organizations that are committed to making a real difference. And we're bringing all of that together in creating this opportunity for young people to serve their communities, while they're serving their communities, to close the inequality gap that we find ourselves in. Very often they work with children, or they work with old people, or they work with communities who are particularly marginalized. And while they're doing that, also focus on themselves and building some understanding and stepping stones towards their own future. So we put a lot of emphasis on the role of a mentor. And so the youth work in groups, and the group of young people gets a mentor, and the mentor is really there to support them and to help them to navigate the acquisition of competencies and skills, as Kate spoke about. And we have a curated program that really focuses on building core competencies that you need, whether you're studying, working for yourself, or going into a job, around work readiness, around emotional intelligence, and around agency. And that's what we focus on. And in building those competencies, unlock young people's agency, their engagement in their communities. And there are impacts in terms of, over 70% every year since we started progress out of the need status into either studies, self-employment, or work. But there are also a number of other indicators that talk to what sits behind that, the increase in confidence. 98% say they now feel ready to enter the world of work. The increase in life satisfaction, the increase in community engagement. They are 52% more likely to continue volunteering in their communities than other young people, which builds social cohesion and closes a whole lot of gaps in those communities. And I think that they are very often better prepared to think about how we change the next generation, because a lot of the work they're doing is with children, and so you're actually training the next generation of parents, caregivers, etc. I think the other thing that's very important in all of this is that as we work with young people, we realize that there's a level of creativity and energy that we're just not adequately harnessing. And unlocking that just does magic in communities. So we see coming out of the program, a number of young people have set up their own community organizations. A number of young people have started initiatives that reach out to others. And that's really what we're unlocking, is we're unlocking citizenship when we're unlocking these young people. I think that there's no question that young people are hungry for opportunities. And so I think Lauren spoke about it earlier, and I think others have spoken about it. They're hungry for opportunities, but what they are missing is they're missing the scaffolding and the easy access to the scaffolding. And I think that's really what we focus on. I think that we also start making young people visible in a society that often makes them invisible. And I think that that is really, really important. And I think that a key part of our role is building the ecosystem that enables that to happen. So we heard about the well-being. We have a psychosocial ecosystem with a whole lot of partners so young people can get support. I'm always devastated by how many young people have been or are survivors of gender-based violence and get triggered in the work that happens and need that support and haven't had that support before, as an example. I think that there's also an ecosystem of social networks where most young people have come out of households that haven't had working adults in the household, and so they don't have the network. So where do you even start when most things happen through a network? So it's about building that ecosystem of networks. And I think that the other thing that's very important is starting to create like possible pipelines for careers in different ways. And I think, Kate, you spoke about it in the self-employment, but I think, 30% of our young people, we do a lot of work in schools. 30% of our young people go on to be teachers. They are the next generation of teachers, and they're people who have worked with children, discovered they loved it, and then go and do teaching. Not people who thought they would like working with children and then discover they hate it, which many teachers do. Similarly, into the health sector, into nursing, into libraries, into sport. And so I think we're helping young people unlock and find their passions, and that becomes really important. And I think we often underestimate what exposure does. And I think public employment programs have a huge role to play in exposing people to different things, because we don't know what we don't know until we've tried it. And, we're giving people the opportunity to do that. And, I think the last thing to say in relation to this is that it's very important that there's a diversity of activities. And what I love about the National Youth Service Program is it allows, and it's very similar with SEF, it allows people to work in multiple spaces so they can choose where they feel some resonance. And I think that very often what that does is it unlocks new possibilities that might not have been there before.
Thank you, Jackie. So I will not be doing my job if I don't ask them a few questions, right? But I am going to leave time for all of you to ask questions. I'm going to start with Mafaseka. Mafaseka, so how does the strategy that you have outlined move us beyond individual programs towards systemic change?
So, I think one of the hardest things with the strategy is that it depends on so many different players. There's so many different departments that have a role to play. Organizations outside of government, the private sector, as well as our CBOs, our NGOs in our various communities. So the toughest thing with this is coordinating this broad ecosystem of players, like bringing people together in a room to agree on this is how we're going to solve youth unemployment is extremely difficult because departments have different mandates. The private sector also, they have their mandate, and CBOs are always trying to contribute to solving the challenge. But what we are proposing is to have Work SA or the Youth Employment Strategy as the shared framework across government, to have it adopted as this is the shared framework that we are going to address youth unemployment as a whole of government approach. And the processes that have been followed to date have been fairly positive. We had good reactions when we presented the strategy to various departments, and we are hoping to get it adopted at Cabinet within this month, actually. So then we will have this Work SA Youth Employment Strategy that is adopted by all of government, and we will have a shared vision of what it is that we need to unlock, what it is that we need to do to unlock youth employment in our country. And a lot of the activities, the deliverables or the milestones under this strategy do relate to reform change, to looking at how we incentivize businesses even to create opportunities for young people. For example, we're looking at expanding the, the Global Business Services Incentive, which, by the way, is the only incentive within the DTIC's portfolio that has a youth employment creation mandate. So looking at the portfolio of incentives and seeing which ones can be pivoted to also include a youth employment mandate. That way you have that mandate as a department to take care of young people and to create youth employment opportunities for young people.
Thank you. Thank you, Mafaseka. Alex, over to you. How do we ensure that rural youth, women and young people with limited networks are not left behind?
Oh, I wish I had the answer for you to say that here it is, and if that's the case, if we do this, it won't be the case. The answer is actually similar to Mapaseka. It is taking a systems approach where we find ways to engage all the tools at our disposal. I think you are rightly implying that in those outlying areas, in rural areas, people are not as digitally literate. Neither do they have, at least currently, the same digital access to, say, for example, Harambe's flagship tool, sayouth.mobi. So if we don't find a way to collaborate with the NYDAs of the world, of the DEL centers, with the bricks and mortar centers, that predominantly is in the hands of government institutions. If we don't find a way to partner and put the BPS solutions and the SA Youth solutions and the public employment solutions in all those places, then we will be left behind. So I think Kate used it's something around, we can't think about a program, we need to think about the whole pathway solution. And I think in those cases, it's even more the case.
Thank you, Alex. Kate, how do we move young people from programs and training into actual jobs rather than leaving them trapped in the cycle of the many, many interventions that we have?
I wish we had an answer to that, and I think today has challenged us by highlighting that the problem is on the demand side. That where there are no jobs, it doesn't actually matter how many interventions you introduce. We do need to deal with the problems on the demand side.
Yeah.
That said, we can't just wash our hands of the problem and abandon young people to their fate. I mean, I do think programs like public employment raise aggregate levels of employment. We saw that in the latest QLFS, where the school program ended in December, didn't start again in January, and the single biggest cause of the drop in employment that caused a lot of shock and horror in the media was actually the loss of that program. So there we were able to see very starkly that actually we raise aggregate employment through these programs. And important as it is that the programs meet the needs of participants and strengthen their ability to navigate systems, and important as it is that the programs create social value, we also do have to understand them as systemic level interventions also. Because society as a whole suffers when we have this level of unemployment. Communities suffer. The knock-on effects are terrible. So even though for individuals, it's not a packaged solution that offers a quick pathway into a job because the jobs aren't there, nevertheless, it's contributing to the systemic level impact of unemployment by raising aggregate levels of unemployment, but also through the economic stimulus effects, which are, it's partly about labor market intervention, but these programs are not just a labor market intervention in the sense that the wages that are earned by participants are spent in the local economy. We have evidence that shows, you heard from Josh earlier, evidence from the Basic Education Initiative that shows that that spending can actually be tracked through the economy and is sustaining and creating jobs at other levels. So it's also part of our problem when we look at these programs just at a kind of project scale and at an individual. We also need to look at them in terms of a level up. What is their systemic impact? But for them to have systemic impact, they have to happen at scale. And they have to happen with a level of spatial equity. They have to target rural areas, which they happen to do very well. So for me, part of the answer for Alex's question is we need more public investment in those areas that markets leave behind. So no silver bullet here, but hopefully I've answered your question.
Thank you, Kate. Jackie? So the ALMP study highlights that labour demand differs dramatically across regions, with some former homeland and rural areas experiencing extremely low employment rates. So my question to you is, should employment policy look different in metros versus rural areas?
Thanks, Najwa. So there certainly is a huge difference between metro and non-metro areas. And we see that in the stats, and we see that in the amount of jobs created. I think if we look at that slightly differently, and I think this is where the public employment programs have been so interesting, because they've started to see work in a different way. And we think about what are the care economy needs, what are the other needs that exist in every community, but very often more acutely in rural areas. And what are the opportunities there? And I think one of the things that we maybe haven't given enough attention to, and you spoke about it earlier, is the institutional capacity that is needed to ensure quality public employment, youth service programs, and what that means at scale. And recently we did a thing where we looked at our internal pathways in Year Beyond, and 5% of our youth come back into the system in 5 or 6 different roles, but they come back into the system as mentors to the next cohort of youth, as data administrators, collecting the data and processing the data and stuff, as navigators, helping to navigate and make those links. And I think that we often underestimate the value of those economic stimulants in communities. So maybe where the shift is needed is to start to recognize that all these partners that have been mobilized around these programs are playing an important role, and to start putting some indicators on them around how are they creating opportunities that enable more sustained stepping stones. And then, you know, once you've been part of one of these programs, you've maybe transitioned onto something, and then you take a step into something else. You go into that something else with a whole lot more, you know, whether it's your own thing or something in the market. And one of the things that we've done, and I think it links to this, is we've set up our own training academy to prepare people for all these different roles. And I think that that's where we need to start looking at, is how do we build that institutional infrastructure so that things can happen differently, and recognizing that we might never get a massive call center or a massive opportunity in a particular area because there just isn't enough of the rest of the infrastructure that's needed. But there are other things that can happen in that community that allow for similar kinds of stimuluses. And I think that maybe in our public investment, we need to start thinking about those things. Schools have been leveraged with the BEI. What are we doing in libraries, which are becoming white elephants? What are we doing in clinics? What are we doing in Tusong centers? There's a whole network of public infrastructure that we have not adequately leveraged with our investments. And how do we do that? And how do we build the pipeline? And maybe that's going to bring some of the change.
Thank you, Jackie. Perhaps, looking ahead, what is the one bold shift South Africa must make if we are serious about changing the trajectory of youth employment?
Oh, wow. Just one bold one?
It's the bold question.
I think it would be to value work, to value meaningful work differently. And I think a lot of the speakers have alluded to this. And I like that quote that you mentioned about the president. There isn't a shortage of work that needs to be done in the country. And it's a matter of how do we structure the market incentives to value that type of work. I look back to my own community. I was home in Daung recently, and I'm sure we can all resonate with going back home and seeing the public infrastructure just dilapidated, and how it aches your heart. And you're just like, this is the work of young people. The work of government is, you know, young people should be doing the work of government, meaningfully doing it, contributing to sustaining and making sure that our society is held up high, and at the same time making sure that young people have dignified living standards, or they maintain dignified living standards. So I think we need to change the way we perceive work and the way we define work and how we incentivize work, that's worth doing.
Thank you. Yeah. Alex, the LMP review suggests that South Africa's employment system is highly active, but not sufficiently impactful. If you could change just one thing in the youth employment system tomorrow, what would that be?
I would go for easier access for everybody, including youth, to the informal sector.
Thank you, Alex. Jackie, if Treasury gave you an additional 10 billion for youth employment, where would you invest it and what would you stop funding?
So at the moment, only 100,000 young people get access to youth service. Every single young person who's unemployed should have access to it. So I think I would invest it in making sure that every young person got an opportunity, number one. Number two, 6 months is not enough. 6 months doesn't launch you to anything. So let's give them a year, let's give them a proper foundation. And thirdly, if it was possible, I would make the youth service bit of it full time. Young people need to build work fitness. And then, as they've built that fitness and gained the experience, they then need to have the transition support, which I think a lot of the part-time programs do, to then start looking at what next. So those are the three things I would do with it.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you. Kate, if you could change one policy or remove one constraint tomorrow to accelerate youth employment, what would that be?
I'm going to say two things. The first is, I actually think this is a global issue, that we're having to come to terms with the fact that with technological change and other change, it's not only here, it's actually increasingly a global issue. We cannot rely on markets alone to create meaningful work for everybody in society. But society has to make sure that everybody willing and able to work can contribute meaningfully and create social value. That's a very profound shift in thinking that I think is actually part of a much bigger discussion about how we think about the relationship between the economy and the society. So that would be the big picture issue. But I would then come back and say, everything I've heard today is saying there is no one thing. Everything I've heard today is it needs all of us. It needs complementarity, it needs synergy, it needs us to recognize the value in different interventions, join the dots, build the ecosystem. So maybe that's the one thing, is to build the ecosystem of collaboration, cooperation, synergy, and for integrated approaches.
Thank you, Kate. And so before I turn over to the audience and give them an opportunity to ask their questions, team, can I have the video, please? So just before, there we go.
KZN, a lot of people have lost the spark. They've lost hope.
As a youth, we do not have any activities to do. I realized that there's something missing.
Cinema brings light, brings hope, not only into the room, but in one's soul. It touches their core. When you are watching a film, you relate to it. You get a sense of, I'm alive. I can change my life and I can change others' lives.
When I was facilitating Uthando at Sugasambe High School, a girl just busted into tears. She said she's crying because she's seeing herself in Uthando's life. She didn't know where to go to, but now she's glad that we came into her school.
What Sunshine Cinema Impact facilitators do, they serve as a doorway to people's emotions using film. All the themes that are highlighted in the film are the social ills that we face, that we know. Everyone knows, but no one is communicating it. So having a platform whereby people come together, they have a stimuli, and then they conversate afterwards is a medicine.
Ngithandile ngemovie, ngithanda indlela laba bangani laba abebehlangene ngayo nangewe bebesizana ngakhona.
Sengisho ugogo wayo sadlulile emhlabeni mhlambe angasekho umuntu mhlambe ongayiprovide ngento ezithile. Ukwazile ukuthi kube khona izinto ekwazi ukuthi izenzo so that izoba income ekanjani so that izoqhubeka nokuphila.
The Spark Impact program advocates for two things: the purpose and gig work. The gig work model is seeing yourself as an entrepreneur in what you do, turning that into a business. I've always known that I've been good with words. Why not pay me to share my thoughts? If you take pictures, invest time in that, skill up, and then make money out of it. If we didn't have a sandbox in this area, a whole lot of people would be still in the dark. It would be very sad because it is one thing that brings hope.
Thank you very much. Throughout today's discussions, we have explored various responses to address labour market challenges. One important lesson, though, is that employment opportunities are constantly evolving. Supporting young people therefore requires us to invest not only in existing industries, but also in emerging sectors where the future demand is growing. Over to you, audience. Questions? I've got a lady over there and one over there, and I will come to you afterwards, and then I'll come to you, Vusi.
Thank you. This is Pitiri from the Nelson Mandela University. It seems there's a subtle assumption that work exists somewhere and we are unable to access it. Let me put it that way. However, the question remains unanswered, that where will the jobs come from my perspective. Let's look at the following stakeholders. Let's start from the top down. The Constitution does not promulgate the state to generate direct employment. However, it advocates for a creation of an environment that encourages thriving economic activity. Now, going to National Development Plan, the lady mentioned the NDP 2030. The generation of the needed jobs are supposed to come from the thriving economic activity and the SMEs. However, the department that is entrusted with the responsibility to empower those SMEs, they've released statistical evidence that about 70 to 90% of those.
Question, please.
They continue to fail. Okay. The question now is, and also it is my finding that we continue to have fragmented support systems. Now, what I'm posing is that don't we maybe need an arm of the state that can reinforce our milestones?
Thank you, sir. Right, where's the microphone now?
Hi,
Here you go.
I'm Nina Marie Anker from Stellenbosch University, and my question is about the role and the size of technological literacy and AI training specifically as aspects or focal areas in the work essay agenda's mandate, and how you see it in combination with the other factors or other focal areas of the umbrella mandate that is being proposed.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for the work that you are doing. I think it's very important. So my question is to the PYE. are we looking at rural development as one of the interventions to reduce youth unemployment? Are we looking at improving roads, electricity to generate employment through some of those construction projects and perhaps attract more investment in rural areas? And if not, what are some of the demand-side interventions that we are working on? And just to echo the first speaker, where are the jobs going to come from? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Busi?
Sure, thanks. 3 questions quickly. The first one is from Talenta Mabasa. I suppose it goes to you, Mapaseka. What indicators do you use to determine whether programs have been successful beyond reporting the outputs, such as youth trained or youth placed? The second one from Pamelo Gibinelang goes to, the first part of it goes to Kate, and she asks, what is the difference between Social Employment Fund and Community Works Program? To Mapaseka, is Work SA Agenda Vision informed by the youth inputs? And lastly, Leslie asked a question, given the scale of UE, should we still be thinking about creating jobs or designing mass employment using global demand, livelihoods development, and public service gaps?
Thank you, Vusi. You want to tackle the 2, 3 that came to you?
Thank you to the audience for your questions. I think Pitiri, and you didn't say your name, lady in the front. You're talking about where are the jobs coming from. I ask myself the question every day, where are the jobs and how are we going to get young people in the jobs? But to answer you, the broader framework of the Work SA, so we're not working in isolation as the PYEI, we work within the Project Management Office of the Presidency, and one of the structural reform agendas within the PMO is Operation Vulindlela, and they are responsible for creating that enabling environment for business to thrive and for the economy to actually grow. If you've noticed that there's been some significant changes in our energy supply, we have a lot more steady electricity now. Our ports are opening up, our rails are opening up, passenger rail transport is opening up more across the country. So those are all that is the reform agenda, to restructure the economy, because we do realize that there are significant bottlenecks that are preventing economic growth from happening and therefore job creation from happening. But what the PYI does, it says that that's a long-term intervention. Right now we need to act. We need to act and make sure that young people are getting into jobs. And to respond to the question about the rural development and what we're doing, we realize that economic activity might not, be thriving in the rural economy, and that's why we have programs like a public employment program that will reach young people literally wherever they are. As part of the Innovation Fund, the mandate is that the implementing partners have to focus a cohort of their funding or their allocation has to go towards rural development and youth living in rural areas. So that's how we're able to intervene and reach young people living in rural areas. Ina Marie, you asked about AI and Work SA. Alex, can you help me about, I'm not sure about the data coming across from AI, but we do recognize that it is both an enabler for strengthening the work that we do across government, but also the types of work that young people can get into, which also speaks to the skilling system about the need to prepare young people to respond to AI. And then Talenta, about indicators. The indicators that we use, of course, we don't just look at inputs and training, we also look at outcomes. For example, we measure the number of young people who have sustained income earning opportunities or are still in a job at a 3-month mark, 6-month mark. That's part of the Jobs Boost. In the Innovation Fund, we look at indicators such as if a young person started something, if they started a small business, is it still thriving after 3 months? Is it still thriving after 6 months? So those are some of the indicators. They're different per program because each of the flagship interventions are meant to address a very specific challenge within the labor market. And then is the Work SA agenda informed by youth inputs? So we work with part of the ecosystem in the NPMN is an organization called YD Collab, the Youth Development Collaboration. And when we were drafting the strategy, we present in a technical committee to the ecosystem, like how do you respond to this? Is there something that we're missing? So it is through those channels and through those youth representing organizations that we're able to get inputs on the strategy from a youth perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You want to add something, Alex?
Quickly, Adam, I'm going to try to not repeat, but I'm going to say that if anybody up here or on any YouTube channel claim to really have the answer about what is going to be the impact of AI on the job market in a year or 3 years from now, I think they're looking for clicks as opposed to can claim that they really have the answer. I do think that a lot of you in the room are the answer to having the choices and the tools available to make the most of AI. It is true that if it is true that over the next 5 to 10 years, AI really fuel a big global upsurge in economic activity and GDP, that it is for us as society, as Kate said, to decide how we distribute that wealth windfall, and maybe then think differently about basic universal income or a more sustained and grant system. I think that's quite often we only think about the downside of AI in terms of the potential job loss, which in South Africa we've not seen any real significant evidence of directly. But if it is true that we'll have huge global economic growth, then it is up to us as society and human beings to decide to not put all that money into Sam's pocket, but redistribute it to everybody. Also, just quickly adding on monitoring and evaluation, I think there was some very good news throughout these last 2 days about increased M&E efforts, both from Treasury, also with the DBE program, and within the National Pathway Management Network.
Thank you, Alex. Okay, so Jackie, you want to add anything?
Last very briefly, where are the jobs going to come from? This is what keeps us all awake at night. Because it's the question that is hardest to ask. And part of the dilemma here is that on the one hand, if we want market-based jobs from the private sector, government can't tell the private sector what to do. That doesn't work. And yet the question is asked to government all the time, where are the jobs going to come from? But that's not to let government off the hook, because all these enabling things that we've been talking about, that energy works, that the ports work, that the roads don't have potholes, that that water licenses are, all of these are crucial enabling things and should enable the jobs to come. What we can't easily say is exactly where will the jobs come from. But I think it's just to acknowledge that this is the heart of the problem that we're all actually really grappling with. And to answer the specific question about CWP and social employment, there are definitely similarities in the two models. I think the CWP has, over the last few years, moved away from using NGOs as partners. It's implemented directly through COGTA, whereas social employment is implemented through partnerships with the non-state sector. I think CWP is also an area-based program mapped against municipalities and wards, whereas social employment is much more thematic. So you have work organized in food security or early childhood development, and it's not mapped, it's not spatially based in the same way. But a Treasury official once said to me, because implicit in the question is, isn't there duplication? A Treasury official once said to me, the day everybody in the country has access to the opportunities available is the day we start having to worry about duplication. Until we have reached everybody through our collective programs, actually duplication is not our biggest concern. Reaching everybody is.
Now, Shma, I can quickly list just the sectors that have come out of recent studies of this collective.
Yes.
So you can help me list them. There's last mile delivery, there's agriculture, particularly fruit and nuts. There is tourism, there is digital, there's platform business, there is According to a very recent PwC study, there's mining, also tourism, infrastructure, and ECD and installation, repair and maintenance.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you so much for that. So audience and panelists that are listening to today's discussion, it is clear that the challenge is not simply to run more programs. The challenge is to build an employment system that is aligned to the realities of our labor market, focused on outcomes rather than activity, and capable of turning public investment into real and sustained opportunities for young people. Thus, the question before us is not whether we are doing enough, but whether we are doing the right things, doing them well enough to make a measurable difference. We cannot wait for 50 years. We need to have greater focus on creating or reducing the barriers to self-employment. And that is a message from me to all of you. We haven't, we've spoken about informality, and sometimes we speak about informality and self-employment as intertwined activities. You've heard Prof. Sahi this morning. If we are going to get the employment levels up to a decent level, up to 10%, we're going to wait for 50 years plus. And so for all of the young people here, and for all of those who are not in the room, the message must be, and the understanding must be, and it must land for you, that if it's to be, it is up to me. It is up to you as an individual. And self-employment is an important aspect. And our role is to make sure that we zone in and hone in on what are those barriers to self-employment in our country. And how do we put in the requisite scaffolding, whether that is the social protection piece, whether that is the insurance piece, whether that is the security piece. How do we put that scaffolding in to make self-employment a more attractive option for all of us? We also have to think very carefully. What is the economic and development trajectory that we are putting our country on if we do not seize this moment to reimagine, to redesign, and to implement with vigor? For that, I thank all of you for being a wonderful audience, and I thank my panel for being absolutely awesome. And when you guys get into a funk and things become a little bit too much and you contemplate, where are the jobs coming from? Take a break.
Thank you.
That is for you. Thank you, Kate. That is really
A way to sign out. Thank you so much, Najwa, Dr. Kate, Alex Mapaseka, and Jackie. Thank you so much. They've been a fantastic panel, right? Let's give them a round of applause for that. Thank you so much. Yeah. Ah, there you go. Thank you so much. I want myself a Kit Kat. I'll give it to you as a well of she gives funds to industries, those that create jobs, and the funds they pass them on to people that need jobs. So I got my share. My job is to pass it on, and someone will get this Kit Kat somewhere around the session. So stay put for that, and remind me in case I miss it. Thank you so much, Najwa and the team. A few announcements before we go to the break. We will have broken a record that we've never broken before. We've registered over 1,000 of people online, which is 1,134. Please give that a round of applause. And thank you so much at home for joining us. We appreciate you, and for being in and out and being patient with us. We greatly appreciate you. Another announcement is that the DG of the National Treasury, Dr. Duncan Peters, will be in conversation with Sabelo Makubo at 6:30 p.m. tonight. Hopefully we'll be done by then. So if you want to be part of that conversation, go ahead and because we do have DSTVs in our rooms. I doubt we do have channel 888. But either way, go and stream it live on ubunturadio.com. That is www.ubunturadio1word.com. And if you want to be the part of the conversation, you can send those WhatsApp text and messages on 068 698 69998. That is 068 698 69998. And then Sabelo will be able to get those contributions from yourselves. All right, we will take a break. And by the way, before we take a break, I've observed something. And I was happy during the second session that questions came elsewhere. There looked to be a triangulation between Modise Kamogelo sitting far back, and Kabelo Modise throws it to Talente, and strategically Talente throws it to Bonang on the left. So I thought there was a coordination that is going on there, the way they've been asking questions. But you came in and Talente said, no, I'll also throw in one online. So yeah, let's keep engaging. Thank you so much, colleagues and the team for your contributions. We greatly appreciate it. We'll be back here at 4:20. Please have yourself a coffee, snacks set outside for you. Let's be back exactly at 4:20. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? The event will be starting shortly. We kindly ask all delegates to make their way back to the conference room and take their seats. We appreciate your cooperation and look forward to an engaging and productive session ahead. Thank you.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for taking your short tea break, and we apologize for it was supposed to be 30 minutes, but we had to make it much more shorter. And those that are joining us online, thank you again. We hope you're back and you're here with us as we go to a final session of the day of the GTAC PEC 2026. That is the Government Technical Advisory Center Public Economics Conference 2026. We greatly appreciate you. By the way, you know, between lunch and now, I've made over 10 connections on LinkedIn. And some of you are here. Some of you are now follow. Some of you are now, I'm now connected. Some of you, my request is still pending in your inbox. Please look at it and accept me. I beg, I'm begging you. And the only way for me to do that is to find, I'm just searching for a hashtag PEC, GTAC PEC. I find you on GTAC PEC, you are my connection because I understand that you are either in this room or you are home online and you are part of us here. So why not we connect? So the hashtag is a GTAC PEC. That will make you and I good friends going forward. I've been given a chocolate by Najwa earlier on, and I want to give it away. Who's in for a Kit Kat after a tea break? I see a lot of ladies' hands there, all right? So I'm going to give it, and it's very simple. Tell me, without going on Google, well, you can try, how many publications are available on the GTAC Knowledge Hub as we speak? How many publications are available on GTAC's Knowledge Hub? If you have that answer, please raise your hand. I'm giving away a chocolate. Do we have roving mics in the house? Lebo? Any takers? Still searching? Still Googling? Let's see if AI can save you with this one. Where's the hand? Oh my goodness, this thing. Okay, we don't have roving mics, but let's see if you can shout. And we apologize to those that are joining us online. I'll try and then pass that message to you. Take it away. How many publications do we have? Man, I want an answer. You're telling me about over. All right, we'll pause that one. How many publications do we have on the GTAC's Knowledge Hub? 910 is one answer been given. Any takers? How many publications are on the GTAC's Knowledge Hub? Yes, go ahead. Zippo? Approximately 690. All right, let's take another one. How many? Yes, let me guess again. Majeke, that's a surname, yeah? 270. You're too pessimistic, Majeke. Yes, ma'am? Yes, sir, go ahead. 857 is the answer. One more taker. How many publications are at the GTAC's Knowledge Hub? Banning? 857. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together. We have our winner. I was almost tempted to give it to over 800, but I was looking for an exact answer, and that is 857. Sir, please come on stage and take your prize. Please give him a round of applause. No, not Banning. No. You came after. No. Come, take your prize. You can come. Please give him a round of applause. Run. So for you to know that answer, you simply have to do well done, sir. Congratulations. Yeah? Okay, this is your prize, and don't share it with anyone. For you to know your answer, you simply have to do one thing. Just go on the GTAC website and go to the Knowledge Hub. You'll find a lot of resources there, and currently we are sitting at the 857 publications that are published there. Right, moving along the final session for the day, before we go to, before we close the session today, is going to be a conversation amongst commentators and writers about youth employment in South Africa. And the person who will be helping us with facilitating the session is no stranger to us by now, is Hilary Joffe. But yesterday we made a mistake and said Hilary is from the Office of the Accountant General. In fact, Hilary is from the Office of the Director General of the National Treasury. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and let's welcome Hilary. Over to you.
And if I can ask my panelists to come up on the stage, Nompu, Tara, Mamuketi. Welcome back, everyone, and well done on hanging in there. This has been a long day, and you've made it to the final session. And this is going to be a bit of a change of pace. We've listened for 2 days to the experts, the academics, the policy researchers, the policy makers. Now we turn to the media and the markets. this is the first time that this conference has had this session on writers and commentators, and we'll be interested to know afterwards what you think about it. But I think these are the people who we rely on really to share, to talk to the world about the issues that have been talked about at this conference for the past 2 days. And we have 3 different angles, if you like, on the issues. We have 2 journalists, one a broadcast journalist being Nompu. I think the bios will come up, Nompu Siziba. The bios will come up as they speak, who is with the SABC, so TV journalism. Print and online journalism in the person of Tara Roos, who has also recently published a book called Where to From Here, which I imagine I would certainly want her to talk about. And then Mamoketi Lijani, who has been a columnist for Business Day. She is taking a short break from her column writing, but in her day job, she's the head of strategy at Standard Bank Global Markets, which means she is involved in trading the markets and talking to financial markets players. And she has often told me she absolutely loves the bond market. So if you love the bond market, this is your person. So I hope that we can have quite an informal discussion. Some of these people are very expert question askers in their own right, and I've said to them they're welcome to ask questions of each other. And we will run with a couple of questions, a few questions, and then I hope take questions from the audience. And I hope to take questions also from the back of the audience, because I know that's been a bit of a failure, certainly in the session I moderated yesterday. So we will try and come to you, and I'm going to jump straight in. Mamoketi, the financial markets closely watch every payroll release every month from the US, and yet they don't take that much interest in South Africa's employment and unemployment quarterly figures. Why is that?
Good afternoon, everybody. So I think the economies firstly are structured differently, and employment numbers in the US mean different things to what employment numbers in South Africa mean. Not to say it's not the number of jobs, it's still the number of jobs, but in terms of the implications for the market, they're quite different. So the first thing to note is that in the US, the central bank, or the Federal Reserve as they call it, targets both inflation and employment. So what is happening in the employment market has got a direct impact on what policy is going to do. And so there's quite a straightforward feedback from jobs to policy, and therefore to how markets should calibrate. I also think the other issue is that in the US, the employment numbers give you a really good signal of what is happening in the underlying economy. We know that the US economy, in this way, it's like South Africa, it's about 60% household consumption driven. So to the extent that employment tells you something about what is going to be happening to consumption, it tells you a lot about how the economy is going to perform, and so people take a reading from that. One could argue there's no reason why it shouldn't be the same in South Africa. But I think in South Africa, because of the bifurcation in our economy, essentially, like we always talk about, like this two-speed economy, you know, a lot of demand, taxes, etc., is driven by what happens. It's highly concentrated. It's driven by what happens in the top 20% of the market. So in the rest of the 80%, you could have people losing jobs, gaining jobs, whatever the case may be. But those people are such low earners, and they have such a small impact on the aggregate economy that they almost like the average number, or the number of jobs or lack thereof, is less important than, say, what is happening in the financial sector, where a lot of the taxes are, earnings, etc. So I think because our numbers that get released don't tell us this story, there's this aggregate number, but it doesn't really go into what is happening in the economy, essentially, I mean, this is gonna sound callous, but if a poor person loses a job in South Africa, it doesn't really matter. So we've had a situation, for example, where personal income tax revenues have performed exceptionally well for multiple years, while employment has been languishing and unemployment has remained very high. But that's because the top end of the economy, those people are still getting more and more inflation-beating earnings. And so it doesn't really filter through back into what is happening to the underlying economy, essentially. But I also think, you know, if you look at that 2080 split, for lack of a better word, it's probably, I could be more precise, but I'm going to stick with that. The average in South Africa economy doesn't exist. And to the extent that those numbers, when the employment numbers come out, are giving us an aggregate number, their meaning is very diluted in terms of what the implications are for demand.
Just following up a little bit, how much... your background is in economics, and you work in a sort of a dealing room, as it were. How much of this sort of economics, which is being discussed, employment, unemployment, do you talk to financial markets players about, and how do you translate these sort of sometimes quite difficult labour market kind of issues into terms that financial markets people can understand?
So I think from a financial markets perspective, everybody knows unemployment in South Africa is very high. Everybody knows that that is the base of the economy. So we don't worry about how things are, we worry about how things change. So we don't talk about employment very much, to the extent that it's already a known factor, right? It doesn't really change things in a particular way. I think the discussion around employment from an investor perspective is around the political stability and the stability of the political economy going forward, given what that unemployment signals around inequality and the fragility, therefore, of the social contract as a consequence. And so the investor base thinks at some point, South Africa is going to have to reckon with this, and that could be hugely disruptive from a policy perspective, because people eventually are going to want equality, they're going to want for the right things to be done, and that's what people worry about. But in terms of whether unemployment is high in South Africa, everybody knows that that is the case, and it doesn't really affect your day-to-day. But I also think the other part of the unemployment story really speaks to the potential opportunity that is implied therein, to the extent that if you got people that are unemployed to become more active economically, you could probably unleash more economic growth. So that is also a story of potential. So there's this thing, it's a risk and it's potential, but for the time being, we know what it is, and it really, this is going to sound callous again, doesn't matter.
Yeah, but that sense of unemployment as much of a political risk to financial stability as an economic issue is a perfect place to jump off with Tara, whose book, Where to From Here, looks at the rise of populism and coalition politics. Tara, talk us through a little bit through how youth unemployment and unemployment generally plays out politically.
Youth unemployment has become a very politically divisive issue in South Africa. You know, if we look at the raw numbers, it's 4.7 million young South Africans who are unemployed and 10.6 million who are excluded from the labor market entirely. And populism thrives in an environment where people lose faith that traditional politics can improve their lives. Populism thrives in this environment in which young South Africans go to school, they go to university, and they're unable to find jobs. And so these political parties and these movements that have very radical answers to complex problems become more appealing to them. And when we look at the rise of populism, it is directly linked to the government's inability to address key governance issues, this being unemployment, youth unemployment, crime. You know, if you had to walk down the street and you had to ask ordinary South Africans, what is the biggest issue facing you right now? It will almost certainly be either something related to crime or something related to the economy, whether it's economic stagnation, whether it's unemployment. And this is because it is a key governance issue. And with the inability to address those governance issues, South Africans are going to look for alternatives or stay at home and not vote at all because they cannot find a solution. And that is going to lead to further political fragmentation. And in the current political environment, we simply lack maturity in our coalition politics for the environment, particularly at a local government level, to be stable for many South Africans to say, actually, I trust this institution and I buy into this institution. And hope, you know, it's so important to the functioning of democracy. And when South Africans lose that hope and they lose faith in the government to effectively govern, we see this drastic rise in populist movements and populist political parties.
I want to come back to that, and I'm sure some of the audience will want to ask you some questions, but that is, Nompu, you're a television journalist. In fact, the SABC's reach is more than anybody else in journalism, really. How do you translate the unemployment crisis onto a TV screen?
Thanks very much, Hilary. Good afternoon, everyone. So when the stats come out, that's what they are. They're statistics. And what we seek to try and do is translate the statistics into human stories. So we generally try to speak to people who are affected by unemployment. They may be unemployed themselves. So you will speak to maybe an individual, their family, and the wider community. Because invariably what happens is that wherever you go, unemployment is a thing in a given area. And that has impacts in terms of the local economy, you know, people not thriving and people just eking out a living on whatever they're getting, whether it's social grants or, you know, a small anyana job here and there. So, so we try and go out. It doesn't happen all the time because it's resource dependent. It's also, you need to be able to cajole someone. Look, I'm doing a story about the unemployment figure. Can we talk to you about how this is affecting your life? And ideally, that's what we seek to do. So we get case studies so that we can put a human face on the numbers, because the numbers are humongous. By putting a human face on it, I don't know necessarily whether it has any impact anymore, because South African audiences do know, because your brother, your sister, your cousin will also be unemployed. So people are aware that this is a phenomenon, and there doesn't seem to be a light at the end of the tunnel, but we still seek, ideally, to put the human face and the impact on it.
And how do you cover solutions or potential solutions? And in other words, what are some of the challenges in getting policy, if you like, or policy efforts onto a screen?
So it's never a challenge to speak to policymakers or even academics like Professor Harun Barat, for example, who was speaking here yesterday when I was covering this meeting yesterday. And, you know, you get all the varying views, but of course the policy process is such a long one, isn't it? Because people have ideas, you know, people come up with white papers, things go through parliament, and, you know, they may or may not finally get the stamp from the president. And then thereafter, you need the implementation. But I think South Africa does all the right things when it comes to policy. But of course, the issue is implementation. And I think that's the challenge over and over that we hear, that it's implementation. You know, to what extent do all the initiatives that are already in play actually help to dent the phenomenon that we have of, you know, massive youth unemployment and broader unemployment as well?
I'm going to come to an issue which has been very much in the headlines, which has been mentioned also at this conference, which is the issue of migration and this notion that foreigners, and particularly foreigners from Africa, are taking our jobs. Tara, first of all, how widespread is that perception? But also, more relevantly, I mean, what is your view on that?
So the numbers are very clear. You know, migrants coming into this country is not the reason for our high unemployment and youth unemployment rates. Migrants who come into South Africa, they help the economy, they start businesses, they employ South Africans, they contribute to particularly the informal economy in South Africa. I think it is important that we do not disregard the very valid concerns of millions of South Africans who feel that illegal immigration is a security risk, because it is. We have very porous borders in South Africa, and it is a security risk not to know who is coming into your country, what they are doing, to have no control or tracking over illegal immigration. That is a genuine concern. But being a journalist, the most important question we ask ourselves is, what does the evidence tell us? And the evidence tells us that illegal immigration in particular is not an impediment to our economy. It is not the reason that our unemployment is one of the highest in the world. And, you know, it is a very difficult balance because, you know, when it comes back to the issue of populism, is that it is much easier to blame someone standing next to you than look at decades of weak economic growth, to look at bad governance and say, actually, what is the government doing to address this problem? It is much easier to scapegoat a vulnerable group. And it is very important for us as journalists to look at the numbers, to look at the evidence, and to bring that story to South Africans. The interpretation of South Africans is something out of our control, but it comes back to this issue that if the government will not govern, if they will not address key governance issues, we will continue to see the rise of things like populism, the rise of xenophobia, and these issues will continue to increase in South Africa, and so will the political volatility and the hatred that is being spread among South Africans until we address governance issues. And that ultimately is on the government.
Do you think, what role can journalists play in trying to address misperceptions, if you like?
You know, you raise a very important issue that it's beyond the statistics. You know, GDP can increase and South Africans still feel poorer. Interest rates can fall, inflation can fall, people still won't be able to find jobs. You know, the ordinary South African is not thinking like a journalist, is not thinking like an economist. They don't care about GDP. To them, the economy isn't measured by GDP, it's measured by the cost of living. And it's very important for us, while reporting on the statistics and reporting on the evidence, because that is our jobs, to take into account the real perceptions of South Africans and their real lived experiences. Because I think when we come at these issues like xenophobia, you know, like populism, and we address it with both the evidence and the compassion to South Africans to say, I understand your perspective, I think, you know, that is really how we take a step forward as a country.
Mamokete, yes.
I just wanted to come in on this one also because I'm an immigrant, so I'm Sotho, and I grew up in Lesotho. That's where my home is, and I'm there all the time. I have half my family lives in Botswana. I'm there all the time. I went to school in Swaziland, so I'm also there all the time. So I have a very regional view of unemployment. And we're here talking about youth unemployment, and I can tell you in all the countries that I've just mentioned, they have exactly the same problem, if it's not arguably actually worse. So I think there's a regional problem here that we're not talking about, or I haven't been at a forum where we actually think about this as a regional issue with regional pressures. So if Zimbabwe's economy is completely dysfunctional, South Africa's dysfunction actually creates dysfunction in the neighboring economies to some extent. And so when you talk about immigration and you're like, oh, people must stop. So culturally, we grew up with a situation where people came to Gauteng to work. Whether you were coming from Swaziland, you were coming from Lesotho, this is where people came to work. You came to South Africa to work. So culturally, that's still the immigration pattern, as has been the case since you have industrialization in the region. And so I look at the whole thing about immigration and unemployment And I don't think it's going to stop, regardless of, how aggressive, South Africa is around borders, etc. Because there are push factors within what is essentially not one country, but one sort of labor market economy. And I'm just intrigued by that sort of integrated, more integrated look, as opposed to just it being about South Africa.
Sounds like there's a research agenda here for some of the people in the audience. I don't know that we've had much regional discussion in the past couple of days. Nompu, you are nodding. What are you seeing out there in terms of, migration?
I think
the issues are populism.
What Sis Mamuketi was saying is correct, really. That it's easy just to look at your situation and not understand that you're located in a bigger picture. And I think there's a real issue around the importance of African unity and finding strategies to work together towards dealing with these, systemic problems. Because otherwise, if you're trying to fix things on your own, and yet you're aware of the backdrop, the history that Sis Mamuketi is talking about, that traditionally South Africa has been the place that people come to. I think obviously a lot has changed in terms of the pie, just hasn't been growing, and therefore now you suddenly look at your neighbors and start blaming them because of the problems that you have, because the pie is not growing. It only grows for those, as she was saying, who are at the top. Those at the bottom just, eke out. So I think that there does need to be more of a regional approach to this particular issue. How that's done, maybe these very clever young economists can begin to do papers around that, because I think we're just going to keep on going in circles and circles. And it's not the first time that we've had a flare-up in terms of xenophobia. It happened in 2008, and it's happened even thereafter. It happens every now and again that things happen, forces come together, and suddenly there's this strong feeling against each other's neighbors or whatever it is, and people drift away. I know during COVID, for example, that was a health issue, of course. People did go back to their countries because they had no means of earning a living. So they went back to their countries, to Zim, Malawi, wherever it was. And when they found a gap, they came back and continued as per normal. But it's very complex, as Tara says. It's a very, very complex thing. And as the finance minister said yesterday, it needs all hands on deck to actually deal with it. But I think we need to be able to get from the point of just talking about things and coming up with ideas and actually implementing them.
I'm going to turn to one issue which has loomed quite large at this conference, which is the informal sector and informality. I don't know whether you've sort of followed the conference, but you may have followed the debate, and the point made by Professor Borat and others is that one of the big reasons for South Africa's youth unemployment problem is that we have very low rates of informality. And as he put it, South Africa looks a bit like Switzerland, and it really shouldn't. And I'm asking you, Tara, in a sense, how do South Africans look at the informal sector? Because, and I'm relating it back in a sense, some of the populism and the xenophobia tends to get turned precisely against some of those informal traders. And while the people in this room may say informality is one of the solutions, one of the big solutions to the unemployment problem, and it should be nurtured, if you like, that informal sector. What do you think the perceptions are out there, and how does it play politically?
I think many South Africans, particularly in the middle class, are very skeptical of the informal sector. But the informal sector plays an important role in every good, stable economy. But what we see in South Africa is that the informal sector is particularly vulnerable. You know, they face many structural barriers when we're looking at trading restrictions, licensing issues, just basic infrastructure. And there isn't really this government support of the informal sector when there largely should be. G20 was a really good example of this. We saw many informal traders and vendors shut down around the G20 Gallagher area because of the G20 event. And that had a drastic effect on, you know, the employees of the informal sector and the growth of the informal sector during that trade period. And when we look at these vulnerabilities, it is very important for us to take into account that not everyone is going to work for a big company. Not everyone is going to work for a massive corporation or work in government. The informal sector provides a very stable base for many young South Africans in particular to get their start, to get their foot into the job market, into the economy. And it's very important that we nurture and that we grow that. You know, the informal sector right now largely is viewed as the second-class economy in South Africa, and it shouldn't be. There shouldn't be these increased barriers around the informal sector, particularly in an economy like South Africa where growth is sluggish. We're in a position now where our economy isn't growing at the recommended 4 to 5% per GDP. And so we do need to have increased awareness around the informal sector, particularly at a government level, to say, how do we nurture and grow this aspect of our economy that is vital to us getting out of the sluggish stage and to even starting to chip away at our high youth unemployment rate?
Nompit, is this something that you cover as part of your economics coverage?
Well, you know, especially in areas like Gauteng, you know, there's been this big push to invest or to promote the township economy. And there are policies out there around the township economy, but the extent to which it's been a success, I'm not quite sure. And we haven't sort of done a holistic story about the success thereof. But yes, you know, we will go to, you know, stories that promote the township economy and talk about great things that are being done in certain corners, you know, in Gauteng, for example, around that. But I think that policies like that are good, but again, they need to be nurtured, and then, you know, money needs to be put in place to be able to encourage and invest in entrepreneurs who have great ideas, who can make their local areas buoyant and create jobs, etc., etc. But how widespread that has been, you know, it remains to be seen.
Last question, and then I'm going to open it for questions from the audience, so get ready. Mamoketi, I'm going to ask you this one. I mean, to what extent what should government be doing about unemployment? And I ask because, you know, there's sort of, should government be focusing on enabling investment by the private sector? Should it be intervening directly to create employment or employment opportunities?
You should do everything. I don't know why you're choosing between those two things. You should, the whole thing, the hell a lot. So I always say, you know, you can, as Reedy Club used to like to say, you can walk and chew gum at the same time. So there's no need to choose from one to the other. I think what government needs to do is to center employment absolutely in every single thing that they do. So apply that lens to every single policy that you do across all areas, right? Whether it be in economic spheres where you can say, okay, this is policy that is economic in nature. But then, you know, even outside of like economic policy, in other policy spaces as well. And what that looks like is, you know, you talk about whether they should be intervening directly. Obviously, to the extent that there's fiscal space and there are things that make sense to do, you want to be intervening directly because you want to try and assist people and get people out of abject poverty and get people into jobs, get people into the jobs market, get job support programs and all of that. So of course you want to do those types of things, no doubt. But then you also have to say, they were talking about OV now, which is a long-term sort of like removal of structural constraints to economic growth. Obviously, that's going to be jobs positive as well over time. But then when you look at, procurement policies, what is in those procurement policies? What are you doing within the labor market? Is that going to get more people employed? What are you doing around spatial planning? And I know that's part of what Treasury's, reform program is looking at. I totally like this idea of getting cheaper public transport, but the question also is, why are we moving so slowly on all of these things? I mean, like everything is like moving glacially, even the most obvious things. And then there's issues around, I think you were talking about that, Tara, around like licensing. For crying out loud, how hard can it be to change some of these rules? So I think we need to ask our public officials, our political leaders, to do the things that serve us at every single sphere and apply the same sphere and say, if you're in a municipality, what is council doing? Why are councils putting these bylaws in place? Why have we kept like apartheid state bylaws? Why? These are questions that we need to ask as citizens of our political representatives who make the laws that we need to live by. How have they applied that lens?
So Mamokete talks about a very important thing about municipalities. Yesterday I was busy interviewing the DG of National Treasury, not realizing that National Treasury had withheld funds from 69 municipalities. And thereafter, I had people on the phone saying, hey, did you speak to the DG about them? I'm like, no, I didn't. So, but anyway, that's a big story because that's the elephant as well in the room from a local economic perspective. Municipalities that are not functioning, municipalities year in, year out that are called out by the AG and don't seem to have to resolve their issues, from one year to the next. And if that isn't sorted out, it becomes problematic because people invest in communities, they invest in localities. And if municipalities are not working, then you're not going to have investment. I remember the story of the chicken people, Astra. They were based in a particular municipality, and they decided to disinvest from there because they weren't getting basics like water and electricity. And that affected jobs and so on and so forth. So there's so many layers of things that need to be attended to. And I think the municipalities is a key one. I'm interested to see what National Treasury is able to do with these 69 municipalities, because they've said, come to us, explain to us how you're going to use the money and that you're going to pay your service providers properly. Okay, fine, they do that. They say to Treasury what they want to hear, but then what happens thereafter? Because ultimately, this is a problem that is intrinsic, inherent, that has been there for a long time. You can't just say, I promise to do better and get the money and then repeat the same mistakes thereafter. So I think municipalities are a big one.
And Hilary, I think there was one question that was on the outline that you didn't mention, and I think it's particularly important that we bring it in now around, how does one communicate what could potentially be quite complex ideas. And I think it's become incredibly important that we communicate and help people understand how what is happening actually affects them ultimately. So we live in an environment where in a normal small municipality, people will be like, I don't have a job, and they'll go to the councillor and they'll say to the councillor, can you please give me a job? And our job is to get the message to people that what you need to be asking your councillor for is for them to change the bylaws. So you don't ask them for a job, you ask them to change the bylaws. And we need to make those linkages to people to say, actually, this is how this affects you and affects your neighbor and affects your community, and this is what you should be asking for. Simplifying those connections so people can actually see them, I think, is very important.
Yes. We've had a really freewheeling conversation, as you would expect from a bunch of writers and commentators. So you can ask freewheeling questions on
Somebody at the far end.
all of the topics we've covered. Okay, it's quite, hold on, I'm going to see. At the very back, I'm going to start. And then there's at the side is number 2. Then number 3, and then I'll come to you, Visi, for online. So I've got 4 as far as I can see. Not counting. Yes. So at the back first.
Right. Thank you very much for your insightful conversation. I just have 2 questions. One for Mamkiti. Let me start first. In your statement, in your conversation, you were saying if, quote unquote, if a poor person loses his job, it doesn't matter. So my question is silence from government on mass general and youth unemployment a passive version of the statement that you said? And the second question to the whole panel is it right for me to say voter apathy among the youth is a consequence, a political consequence towards unemployment, which poses a political risk to political parties who wants to be voted? Thanks.
Will you? Did you identify yourself?
I'm Kamagelo Modise from the Treasury.
Right, and questioners, please tell us who you are.
Thank you. This is Marius from University of the Western Cape. My question is on the elasticity of government's political system to the media pressure on key governance issues, and in this context, the issue of unemployment. Do you think there is some evidence or considerate evidence of the response from the political system or from the political side when it comes to the issue of unemployment, and whether how significant and impactful is that response? Thank you.
There was one over here. Yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Gracious. I'm doing a PhD in economics at Stellenbosch and studying South to South migration. Thank you for this refreshing session and for actually starting to talk about immigration. I just wanted to understand your view of how much of the anti-immigrant sentiment is due to the persistence of the legacies of apartheid, where we had the back gate system where African immigrants were recruited via the back gate and could not get permanent citizenship, whereas the Western immigrants were considered to be skilled labor and could get citizenship. And now, after apartheid, we still have immigrants in the informal sector, and now they are competing with the South African population as well in that informal sector. So how much of that is due to the persistence of apartheid? Thank you.
And Wusi, I think you're next with online questions.
Just one comment and 2 questions for you, Hilary, and the panel. The first one is a comment from Tombigai Sekijana saying Mamukete talking about migration as a regional issue is so spot on. This is a legacy system, which is where conversations need to start. That is Tombigai Sekijana. And the younger Majek asks a question to Tara is if undocumented migration is difficult to measure, how can we confidently conclude that immigration has little effect on unemployment? Let me repeat that. If undocumented migration is difficult to measure, how can we confidently conclude that immigration has little effect on unemployment? So ask Yanga Macheke to Tara. And Zizipo Makaka starts by saying, South Africa has no shortage of policies, strategies, or research on youth unemployment. From your perspective, panel, what is the single biggest constraint constraint preventing these from translating into meaningful employment outcomes for young people, and what should be prioritized to change that for over the next 5 years?
Lots of nice questions, and Mamoketi, I think I may have to let you go first because...
Yeah, that was me under the bus. So I think, you know, political systems respond to incentives and consequences. So to the extent that financial markets are agnostic of what is happening to the employment number, at least in the short term, obviously, you know, we know that financial markets can provide an incentive, you know, or consequences to bad policy that political systems then have to respond to. So if financial markets are looking at the unemployment story and not responding in the short term, then they're not playing that role of incentivizing or lack thereof. A change in policy or a more strident response in policy, right? So the question really speaks to how do you get political incentives aligned, or political incentives aligned to our interests as citizens, and we have a democratic process, and so our means of doing that is the vote. So it really does come down to people voting and using their democratic voice in a way that is more strident, so they get the kind of policy responses that they would like. But financial markets, I'll give you an example about how colors they can be, right? If metals prices are rising, the rand will strengthen like it did in 2021 when Durban burnt. So that whole thing, markets just blinked through. And really it's because they capture a very narrow piece of information as far as the economy is concerned. They capture whether people who invest money are going to get their money back, and if it's going to be more than it was yesterday. How many South Africans are employed, whether people are happy, that doesn't feature.
Are there any other questions you want to pick up on at this point, and then I'll give the others a chance?
Yeah,
some of the questions were not directed
I think
at
the other one, I mean, this is me being really veering outside of my area of expertise, but I'll do that anyway. The whole idea about what is the biggest constraint to youth employment. I think the youth employment issue is not South African. It's not a SADC issue. It's not an Africa issue. It's not a Global South issue. It's a global issue. So the same with immigration, by the way. The two seem to go together. So youth unemployment is a problem across multiple, especially countries that are in the emerging world. And it maybe speaks to something much more structural. And something that is not even about what's happening in South Africa per se, but it speaks to something about how economies function, how society has changed, how production operates, about what happens when you industrialize, but you're not actually absorbing labor, you're using more capital. I don't know what the answer is, but I do think to some extent, if we want to have a better understanding of what's going on here, to some extent, we need to look outside of South Africa. Also, Chinese competition, gutting manufacturing globally. So those jobs that are no longer available, that's the US story about why they now have Trump. So I think we do need to think about it a bit more broadly as an issue. And I mean, in other economies, they're talking about, Duncan is going to kill me. But that's why in Europe there's a big discussion around the basic income grant. Mm-hmm. So it's really, really speaking to these issues. When economies change and maybe utilize less labor, what are the other ways in which we can ameliorate suffering?
Tara, there were a couple of questions directly for you, but also pick up on any of the others which you...
So I'll start with the immigration question. Immigration in terms of raw numbers is not difficult to track in South Africa. the issue comes in, who are these migrants? What are they doing? You know, what is their formal address? Those are questions we don't have answers to because they are not documented and Home Affairs doesn't have that information. But if we're talking in terms of raw numbers, we know that migrants make up 2% of the population in South Africa, and we know this because of a variety of reasons. We know that migrant children are only 1% of our school system in South Africa. How do we know that? Because you don't need to be a documented citizen in this country to receive free basic education. It only becomes an issue when you get to matric and you don't have the correct documentation to register to write the National Senior Certificate exams. But to enter schooling in South Africa, you just need to be physically present in South Africa and have an address. So there is no level or barrier of entry to collect that data from schools. The exact same thing applies to clinics. At a clinic, they're not asking you if you're documented or not when you receive a service. You are simply going to that clinic to receive a service. And so Stats.SA is really a world-class organization and data collecting machine in South Africa. And so we know what the raw numbers are. The difficulty comes in, you know, if someone is undocumented in this country, how are they earning their income? Is it legal? You know, these are real security questions that we don't have the answers to. But in terms of the raw numbers and the impact of migrants in South Africa, we know the numbers on that. And the stats tell us that migration in this country and having undocumented migrants in this country is not the reason that we have high unemployment or high youth unemployment. Moreover, the economic situation we find ourselves today in South Africa is because of decades long of bad policy choices, of economic stagnation, of no growth in South Africa, of corruption. You know, these issues started way before many migrants arrived in this country. And there was a lot of fluidity of people going back to their country, of people coming back into South Africa. So, you know, the issue to say that we blame it on migrants and, you know, they're taking our jobs is just not even remotely close to the truth. Touching on young South Africans having political apathy, you know, unemployment, particularly youth unemployment, is political. And it's almost the cycle. You know, the inability to address governance issues leads to voter apathy, leads to people not voting, leads to more political fragmentation, which leads to more chaos in government, and the cycle just continues in that loop. And so it is really on South Africans, particularly young South Africans, to break that cycle. I mean, if we look at 2024, there were 11 million registered voters who did not vote. There were an additional 2 million South Africans who were eligible but not even registered. That's 13 million people that could have drastically changed the outcome of an election. And it's very easy to say, well, oh, my vote doesn't count and my vote isn't going to change anything. You know, 13 million people said that, and we look at the outcome of the country today. And so I think it's very important not to get discouraged by governance issues, because governance issues can be fixed. You know, the problems we have in South Africa are not out of this world. They're not anything unique to us as a country. There are solutions to them, and it is really about the political will of the government that we as South Africans vote into power to change those governance issues. And so I think that is particularly important. The question about elasticity in terms of government and our reporting on those issues, I think that, you know, government is incredibly transparent, particularly, you know, as someone who covers Parliament but covers the finance committees in Parliament and is really doing a lot of financial reporting. I think that there is a lot of transparency and a lot of openness, particularly from public servants. There's a very important distinction between the department and the ministry. And those who are politically appointed and those who are public servants and work in government departments. And I think, you know, particularly strictly speaking on public servants, they are very undervalued in South Africa and they do amazing work. And I think that there is genuine political will to try and fix the issues, but the political viability coming from those who are politically appointed, I think that's where the waters start to get very murky.
Nampu, and I don't know if I don't know that you're old enough to address the question about the apartheid legacy and how that may affect.
Well, I think I am old enough, but of course I'm aware of the history, but I was born somewhere else. I was born in the UK. But I think that the apartheid legacy obviously does play a role. In terms of one of the greatest obstacles for South African youth. I think we can't run away from the fact that the education system is not where it should be for the majority. I think for those people who are privileged, you can get first-class education in South Africa relative to the West, to what you can get in the West. First-class education, and you can compete with whoever, wherever you go in the world. But for the majority, I think the education is problematic. And I think that there are people out there who could get jobs, but they don't have enough money to get their drivers, get a license or whatever it may be. They don't have enough money to actually go to the internet cafe and go through, whatever they need to do to apply for jobs and so on and so forth. Speaking to what Mugeti was saying about the BIG, a basic income grant, there is an argument for it, but then of course, there's also the maths around it, around whether we can afford it as a country. We have a very thin tax base and so on and so forth. Can we really sustain that? Every year, Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana tells us that, the SRD, we're not quite sure, that is the Social Relief of Distress Grant. We're not sure, we'll definitely have it next year, but we're not sure beyond that. So resources is a real thing. But I think that people's means to be able to actually look for jobs is a hindrance, and also education. Because remember, we are now in the 21st century. We're talking about the fourth industrial revolution, AI, et cetera, and we have to be able to compete with the next man, north of Limpopo as well as around the world. And the only thing that can enable you to compete is education.
AI, in fact, is the subject is the subject of tomorrow's discussion.
Can I just make also another contribution? I think what we should also note is that unemployment in South Africa does not present as equal across the board. It's highly variable depending on area. So unemployment in and around Cape Town is very low. In and around Gauteng is quite low. If you go to rural Limpopo, it's extremely high. So there's also something, I think Ayabonga actually wrote a book talking about, I just don't remember the name of the book, but it was actually quite insightful, talking about the legacy of apartheid labor reserves and how,
Tawe?
Yeah, Tawe.
Okay.
Because, and we need to think about how that economy was structured where development was concentrated. And that the experience of unemployment, etc., varies dramatically depending on the area. So even when you look at the aggregate number, there's still the 80-20 rule as far as South Africa's geography is concerned in terms of where that unemployment is concentrated as well. And I think it speaks to the idea about how does somebody look for a job if you're in rural Limpopo and municipal failures are probably a lot more of an issue for you, and how do you then move from where you are if there's this big spatial issues around moving from the rural area into an urban area where maybe employment opportunities actually exist. So I think there's a lot of nuance that we need to apply, and the solutions have got to address that as well.
I think that's all we have time for, and thank you so much to our panelists and also to our questioners from the audience. If you have more questions, please send them through. We can put you in touch. I think this has been a conversation which has brought in some fresh themes, or brought in some themes we've already touched on in a different way, and in a sense has been a bit of a call to action, among other things, to a lot of people in this room to go out and vote in the next round of elections, but also to look at unemployment as a regional issue, and I suppose to look at sometimes what it looks like on the ground, which is what some of the people on this panel get to do every day. So thank you very much for joining us, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you so much, Hilary. Thank you, Mamukete. Thank you, Tara. And thank you, Sis Nompu, for a wonderful session. And you may, I don't want to say leave my stage, but I want to say thank you so much for the wonderful session that you've given us. and this is the way out. They say if you want to get the honest, unfiltered truth, put journalists in a panel. Oh my goodness. Oh, I'm telling you, that's all you're gonna have. Only truth, unfiltered, and in the midst of it, they apologize to the policymakers. Oh, Duncan will kill me for this. But the truth will come out. So you must read between the line what the message is there. So thank you so much. Quite a very refreshing perspective that we got from our panelists and the conversations that they've been having with us here. All right, so the day has been wonderful today. We started very early with a nice, unfortunately today we don't have our bureau to give us the colors of how we went, that is colors. But we did start with Wipuso Mudise that joined us with the panel, and they spoke about where will the jobs come from. And that sort of linked to every session that we spoke about, including the sessions that we had and the questions that you had. That was also segued with an expert talk. There you had the Sibusiso Gumbi, Dr. Josh, Michael Sachs also being on the panel, including Nico that was here. Of course, we went on to speak about what does the research tell us where the jobs could be found, and the panel was facilitated by Amanda Jitsing with, of course, some of the policymakers, including Ulrike and Dr. Amina. Andrew Donaldson was on the panel, Dr. Tim as well. We're trying to decipher the question, what does research tell us in practice? We spoke about the intervention, quite a very fascinating conversations we had with some visuals of the videos. If you may remember with what Najwa has told us about some of the work they do at the Jobs Fund and how it supports the effort of government to be able to give us the jobs that are much more needed. And we had, of course, also Dr. Kate coming in, Alex Mapaseka, and Jackie also coming in to speak about the interventions that the respective institutions, including the presidency, undertakes to make sure that there are jobs and initiatives that are fitting for the government. Right, and how fitting that we close the conversation with a commentary from some of the writers and seasoned journalists and reporters here, led by Hilary Joffe, Mamuket Tara, as well as Nompu, closing the session beautifully. So this is what we had today. A lot to learn, but much more to think about. And we hope that these will inform your preparations for your debates tomorrow. Some of these would be fresh information, fresh perspective, speaking about covering the Southern African region, speaking about the rural component of the job. So a lot to think about as you prepare for those debates. The poll is up. If you haven't done so yet, the poll is up. Please let us know what you think and how the session went, and this will help us to improve tomorrow. So we will appreciate if you could send us all those feedback by tonight so we could reflect on them and fix or amend where we have erred and ensure that we improve and keep on doing what we are doing well. So the poll is up, both to you online as well, everyone here. Please just fill that poll for us to get those. It will be up throughout the night, but if you can fill it as quickly before you leave the room, that will be greatly appreciated. Any announcement am I missing? All good? All ready to go? But Neng has been sitting there. He came to the unreserved or the reserved table, uninvited, and he's been telling me he wants to say something. I'm not sure if the roving mic is here for Baneng to say something before he leaves. He has his quotation that he wants to tell us what it means to him. He's been posturing me to say something. If the mic is here, Baneng wants to tell us what the code is. But before Baneng comes, or they come with the mic, please make sure that you complete that poll before you leave the room. We'd really, really like to have it in. Also, our social media platforms are still actively monitoring your inputs and your beautiful photos. The hashtag is a GTAC PEC. We'll be able to screen those to you and follow you. Start making those connections online. How's that? Baneng, do you have your mic?
Yeah, but there's no quotation.
Where's your code? Oh, there's a code. Baneng has a code. Please read that code and tell us what it means, what's your understanding of it and what it means to you?
Okay, it reads as opportunities thrive where barriers are broken. Well, I'm going to need some time to process this. I'll give you the answer tomorrow morning.
You have 3 seconds. Let's go.
All right, so I guess in essence, the message is that in every crisis, there's an opportunity. So with the 2008 global financial crisis, as well as the COVID-19 pandemic, they gave us an opportunity to do things differently and probably more better than before. Yeah.
Thank you. That's beautiful. Give me a round of applause. So where there is crisis, there are opportunities. Unemployment is a crisis to us, and opportunities are here for us to start thinking about how do we contribute to making sure that we deal with this scourge called unemployment, this crisis that is so grave in our country, to solve it. And together, as the youth, myself included, they said 20 to 40, right? We can deal with this one. So ladies and gents, thank you so much for being here today. See you tomorrow. As first thing here, we are back tomorrow. Let me just double check. Be here by 8 o'clock so we could start well in time. Otherwise, it's been a fantastic day being with you today. Until we meet again tomorrow. Bye-bye.